Silly, silly, silly.
So, speaking of ways to kill yourself, Adam.
I'm ready, I think.
Yeah, so I actually don't have an intro for this. I just realized that. I didn't write it. So let's just, I guess, get started here. Welcome to Idiot Seeking Village, where we try to make sense of the senseless. And I think today we're gonna have a little fun with the episode. I think, Adam, you seem ever more despondent and paler and thinner after every one of these recordings so far. And I think I'm looking at this. I need you for the long haul, and so might as well try a little bit harder to make you laugh.
So today we're going to focus on the senseless part.
Yes, in a sense. Yes, absolutely. I think that's a good way to phrase it. So you are a transplant to Long Island, same as me. And I think a rite of passage conversation with friends, neighbors, or anything is, and especially this came up during the Russian invasion of Ukraine and, at other global moments of what the fuckness is, what do you do in case of a nuclear strike on New York City? Right. And because we're on an island and there's no way of getting off the island because all the bridges and tunnels and everything funnel through the 5 boroughs of New York City, which finally will presumably resemble the hellscape that Newsmax and Facebook memes are telling our parents that it is every day.
See, we told you, you see, this is what it looks like.
I have to imagine that at this point, Fox News could save a ton of money by just replaying Kurt Russell's Escape from New York on loop 24 hours a day, and their audience wouldn't know the difference. So I'm always amused by it because in the end, it always boils down to one of two responses is I'm taking my boat to the dock and I'm just boating out of here, right? I'm going to head out to open water. And the other is I'm stealing a boat and getting out of here.
Yes, because I do not have a boat or a dock.
There are not enough boats on Long Island to suffice, right? It should be clear. I just want this out on the record. I am in the latter group. I am stealing a boat. I already have the boat picked out. It's docked not that far from my house. And, I'm not going to tell you all my secret, but, I'll just say this. Fuel is also going to be scarce at that point. So there's different types of boats. Just
give me a finger for what slip number it will be?
And look, if you're nearby, grab your go bag and let's get out of Dodge.
Thanks.
So I think we know, though, what would happen in an actual emergency. Let's be honest. Again, we live on Long Island. This is one of several highly, let's call it self-centered areas of the country. And the first guy out on the dock is going to be a dick and leave his truck and his trailer in the slip. And then no one else is going to be able to use it.
Yes,
basically dooming everyone behind him, right? That's just like an abandoned shopping cart in the middle of a parking lot, and then just nobody's going to be able to go anywhere.
Yeah, definitely. I could see that for sure.
Which kind of brings me a little bit around to today's topic, right? So speaking of nukes and devastation and everything, have you ever watched the HBO series Chernobyl?
No, I have not.
Really? Oh my God.
Like I said, I focus on comedies, and that does not sound like a comedy.
I mean, it's a little bit funny if you think about how comically inept and, just not corrupt. Corrupt isn't the right word, but myopic the whole Soviet administration was, which I think they do a pretty good job of showing that off in this movie. Excuse me, miniseries. But anyway, I actually highly recommend it. It is loved by people. It's not funny, but I've watched it 3 or 4 times by now. Every once in a while, I'm like, I'm in too good of a place. I need to bring myself down, so I'll rewatch it. But I was thinking about it when about a month ago or 2 months ago at this point, we saw Sean Duffy, the head of.
I'm in too good of a place, so I watch it to bring me down. My God.
You got to keep yourself level, right?
How do I get in that place? I want that place. I want to be that place. I want that option.
They're called natural highs, Adam. Look, some people medicate to get to that point. I depress myself with, prestige television.
Okay. So fortunate.
So when I saw Sean Duffy's announcement that we're going to build a nuclear reactor on the moon, my first thought was, so how much radiation is that aimed directly at Earth?
Really? I would have just thought another former reality star is going to be leading a giant endeavor.
I don't know that Sean Duffy is some sort of reality TV star or MMA executive or, whatever other idiocracy level of governments that we've achieved. So Good question, actually. We should come back to that one.
I'm pretty sure he was a Road Rules guy from MTV.
Oh, God, was he?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think it was Road Rules. I think it was one of the first few seasons. You could confirm, but I'm pretty sure.
I am in physical, mental, and emotional pain at the moment. All right. I'm going to move on here because that hurts me, and this is going to make me laugh. So I decided to dig in anyway. So I looked in 2022, actually, pre-Trump, NASA sent out requests for proposal to scope out a moon reactor in the first place. They were aiming for something around like 40 to 60 kilowatts of energy. And the newest ones coming out of Sean Duffy and the Trump administration, they want to go for like 100 kilowatts of power. And that means they've got to bring about like 100 kilos of nuclear material to the moon. This is, for reference, just apparently could power about 80 average American homes.
Okay.
Right? That's how much power we're talking about. So again, my first thought is I watched Chernobyl a billion times. I see these radiation, light. It's kind of like the 9/11. You've got the light show for the Twin Towers, right? Just poking straight up. That's basically what the radiation coming out of Chernobyl looked like, except it was death that was streaming out. So I'm thinking, all right, so we build it up there. You get a stray meteor or something, hit the damn thing, and now it's shooting radiation at the Earth. So I was like, let's dig in on this. So that 100
I'm impressed that you think enough of us that it will make it there the first time without blowing up in the sky.
Wait. I'm getting there, Adam. I'm getting there. So that 100 kilos of material compares to 190 metric tons in Chernobyl's reactor 4. And apparently of that 190 metric tons, only about 6 to 7 were estimated to have actually been destroyed and dispersed, right? The radiological disaster. So that was like 6 to 7 tons. So we're on like multiple factors smaller looking at it. For more reference, Fukushima, the one in Japan in 2011, right? Because of the tsunami, they had about 880 metric tons of fuel melted. It's actually a significantly larger scale. And then 3 Mile Island, the one that predates you and me really, but is the one domestically that often gets referenced. There was about 20 metric tons of fissile material that melted down. So way less materials than at any famous nuclear accidents that probably get referred to at any point. And the way the maths is that if a Chernobyl style incident occurred on the moon, like just a massive, dirty explosion, whatever, it would be 100,000 times smaller than Chernobyl in scope.
Okay.
And they're like, a lot of the things, you read is like, well, there's no atmosphere on the moon, so it can't contaminate, anyone. Like, you can't spread radiation and gas around. I'm like, that's not the point. The point is these things shoot off X-rays, right, and gamma radiation. And that's going to point straight at Earth, presumably, or at least at some point it's going to cross our paths, right? And so are you just going to get like these weird cancer strips, like on the planet where we pass through these things in space? Turns out at the size and scale we're talking about, it actually, the reactor, even if it did go like full-blown Chernobyl, it would generate like 100 trillion times less radiation than the sun does. So in other words, we good, right?
We got it made in the shade. I like it.
Exactly. I'm like, all right, it's good. But that brings me to what you brought up, which was my next one, which was like, all right, cool, but we've got to get radioactive materials to the moon. And I don't know if you've ever seen one of Elon Musk's rockets blow up, but it's pretty spectacular, but at least they don't have radioactive material on them. So let's get to the next one, right, which is transportation. I actually want to refer to, I'm not even going to try to walk through this one. I'm going to refer to an interview at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign with Katie Huff. She's a professor of nuclear, plasma, and radiological engineering there. To quote her, "If a rocket carrying a reactor were to explode or fall back to Earth, it could potentially disperse radioactive material. To mitigate this, the reactor would launch in an unirradiated state using fresh uranium fuel that is only weakly radioactive. Additionally, a radiological contingency plan has been developed for any launch involving nuclear material to comprehensively prepare for response to an accident. There's even a radiological control center at NASA's Kennedy Space Center with special radiological incident response capabilities and highly trained staff who regularly rehearse communications and coordination." End quote. So in just layman's terms, the fuel is sent cold. It hasn't actually been used in a reactor. So it's like of standard radioactivity. So it's like if you just have uranium lying in the ground and it's basically, unless you're like sitting on it for an extended period of time, it's not going to do anything to it.
So it hasn't been like turned on yet. So
exactly that they call that hot fuel. So basically like we're sending it cold. It's basically normal radioactivity. It's minimal risk to anybody who's anywhere near it. Once it's used in the reactor, then it becomes hot. That's when it becomes dangerous. So we are able to transport it safely. So in other words, I was like, cool, this isn't such a crazy idea, and we're not going to Chernobyl ourselves from space. By the way, we're not the only ones doing this. The Russians and the Chinese are also looking into doing this because there's a little bit of a space race going on right now where our three countries and a few others are all kind of like starting to jockey for spheres of influence and positioning on the moon. And it's reasonable once you build a nuclear reactor on the moon to power, whatever science, research, habitation that you build there, you're going to be like, well, we don't want anybody within like a mile of this or 5 miles or 10 miles, right? We want to build like an exclusion zone for safety or whatever it is. So now suddenly you're going to have like territorial claims on this.
You would just think it would be so much easier just to build solar panels there. Just build them and ship them.
It's not though, right? Because remember, the night on the moon lasts for up to a month, right? 28 days. That's the lunar cycle. 28 days is the lunar cycle. So you'll have 28 straight days of light at a fixed position, but you'll have 28 straight days of darkness. So the only way solar power would work is if you built a continuous string of solar panels across the entire diameter of the moon.
And have some really good batteries.
Or have some really good batteries, which we don't have that kind of battery capability now, right? And there's obviously, you can't use something like wind power because it has no meaningful atmosphere, right, to generate that. So so unfortunately, nuclear power ends up being like the safest, cleanest, and most practical way to generate power locally on there. So I was kind of like, all right, this is cool. I'm feeling more comfortable about this. But I know about some other incidents or proposals in the past. We've had some outwardly crazy ideas on how to use nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And so this episode, I actually wanted to share with you some of the crazier and more batshit ones I knew about already beforehand, plus a few others that I learned doing research. So you ready to strap in?
Oh, yeah.
Let's do it. So let's stay with outer space for the moment. Adam, do you know what major world event happened in October of 1957?
1957. No, but maybe it's like Korea, something around there. Or is that Vietnam? I don't know. Yeah, Korea maybe? Something's going on in Korea probably.
Well, outer space. I'll give you a hint. Remember, we're sticking with outer space.
Sputnik?
Yes, Sputnik. The Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite into Earth orbit. And the world freaked out, especially America, right? We had the atom bomb. Then the Soviets caught up 4 years later. And now we're thinking we're still top dog in a lot of ways. And suddenly, holy shit, we didn't realize that we're behind. And now the Soviets are in space and we're nowhere near being in space at the moment. The U.S. is freaking out. Education systems, the government, everyone's like business, right? We're like, what do we do? So do you want to know what totally rational and not at all insane plan that the Air Force came up with in response to the Sputnik launch?
I can only imagine.
Take a guess.
Take over Russia and steal their technology.
I think that would have been more the Army and not the Air Force. No, the Air Force decided that they were going to nuke the moon.
Oh, my God. Honestly, that does sound familiar. But yeah, okay. If we can't have it, neither can you.
We can't have it. No one can have it. No, the idea was that we were embarrassed, right? The country was embarrassed. The government was embarrassed by the Soviets, and we needed to save face. So in 1958, in response to the Sputnik launch, the Air Force tasked Dr. Leonard Reifel of the Armor Research Institute, who would then lead a 10-person team, including a young Carl Sagan, that would draw up what would be called Plan A119. So the idea behind Plan A119 and the Air Force's intention here was threefold. One is that we would get an opportunity to test our weapons platforms in space in front of the entire world. In the process, we'd show off our military capability to deliver weapons to space all the way to the moon. And in the process as well, it's kind of, kind of breadcrumbs for the scientists. We'd have an opportunity we hadn't been to the moon. Remember, the moon landing is another 12 years away from here. Mm-hmm. So we'd have an opportunity to send some probes and whatnot and conduct some basic scientific and geological testing during this process to understand what's going on, and send instruments and whatnot pre-nuking it. And of course, the Air Force was like, we just want the world to see a mushroom cloud on the face of the moon, for that can be seen across the entire planet. So Dr. Reifel, in a much later interview with The Observer, he quipped, "It was clear that the main aim of the proposed detonation was a PR exercise and a show of one-upsmanship. The Air Force wanted a mushroom cloud so large it would be visible on Earth." I read through the report. It's a lot of really basic stuff, but I particularly enjoyed this section by his team regarding potential life on the moon. Remember, we're 12 years away. We're just speculating, what's going on up there. And at the time, scientists thought that life, or like microbial life, right, was still a possibility on the moon for various reasons. So, quoting from the report again, "Provided that no large-scale destructive events have subsequently occurred, it is therefore not unreasonable to expect the presence of both simple and complex organic molecules on the moon, beneath the dust layer. Because of its great potential importance, the admittedly very speculative possibility must be raised that life arose on the moon before the secondary lunar atmosphere was lost. In spite of the unlikelihood of biological contamination difficulties, it is still probably good scientific calculation to make the instrument package as aseptic as practical considerations arrived at after serious evaluation will permit." End quote. So in other words, we're like, there might be life on the moon, presuming it hasn't been destroyed, so let's go destroy it with nuclear weapons. We're not just nuking it to make like a political, military, and scientific statement, but for all intents and purposes, we're going to blow up anything that survived on the moon and is alive just because we can.
It sounds like as they thought about it, they're like, okay, a lot of this stuff is good. Why don't we just do all of it and just eliminate the nuking part? Let's land on the moon with instruments. Let's do all this stuff with that. That sounds like a good idea. But what about the mushroom cloud? We want the mushroom cloud. You can't have the mushroom cloud. Frank, you can't have the mushroom cloud. I'm sorry.
Pretty much, right? We ended up adopting, some of these concepts later on, but we're like, maybe we don't shoot, bombs at the moon. We don't really know what's going to happen. So for me, at least, that part about, hey, there might be life on the moon, it's so funny because it's like, basically, think about, you've got a death row inmate and he's getting lethal injection. And what do they do before they stick the needle in? They swab it with alcohol. It's like, yeah, we're going to kill you, but we want to make sure you don't get an infection in the process, right? That's the same mentality that we take to, all right, we're going to blow up the moon, but let's make sure that our instruments are not contaminating the moon in the process. Like,
we're very thoughtful people, very thoughtful.
We're very kind and considerate bombers. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So let's come back to Earth for a little bit, because most of the crazy ideas were on Earth here. So quick background on this next one. Do you know what the Battle of Kursk was?
World War II, was that Russia and Germany?
Yes. July through August of 1943. It's the single largest tank battle in all of history. And it was like a major turning point on the Eastern Front in the Soviet Nazi battle. And so it involved some 2,500 German armor units and some 5,000 Soviet armor units, including UK and US Lend-Lease armor that we had sent over. So fast forward at the start of the Cold War, at the end of World War II, the Red Army has the world's largest armored corps, right? Stalin moved all of the production behind the Ural Mountains, right, after Operation Barbarossa and the invasion by Germany. And they basically rebuilt their entire infrastructure and just were able to just shotgun out tanks in mass, right? That's why they were able to push back ultimately. By the late 50s, well into the Cold War, the Soviets have some 30 to 50,000 tanks in the Red Army. And just for reference, the U.S. at that time has somewhere between 12 and 15,000 tanks. So the Red Army is a monolith that just dwarfs any other army, especially in terms of armor. which was, fast moving armor was the reason for German success in Blitzkrieg. So you go, what the heck are we going to do? Europe is still rebuilding. They don't have huge armed forces of their own, and we're outnumbered. And how do we even get, we can't just send all our tanks over to Europe and just park them there. Even if we did, they're outnumbered like 2 to 3 to 1, right? Enter the Davy Crockett. You ever hear of the Davy Crockett?
No, I've heard of Davy Crockett enough, but the Davy Crockett.
Yes, not Mr. Davy Crockett, the Davy Crockett. So the Davy Crockett was a portable nuclear weapon developed in the late 50s, and it was in service for about a decade, starting in 1961. What it did, it was basically a bazooka that fired a low-yield nuclear warhead, like about 10 to 20 tons of TNT. It weighed around 76 pounds of warhead and had a range of about a little over 1 to 2 miles. It was designed to provide tactical nuclear firepower on the battlefield. It would be launched either from a tripod that was carried by specially trained infantry, or
very strong infantry. That's a lot of weight.
76 pounds. Yeah. I mean, that's not the full amount of what a grunt will carry at that time. Or they could mount the tripod to the back of a Jeep.
Right. And makes sense.
And then bring it out there.
Because I can only imagine if the capability of something being launched that can travel a mile or two, the concussion force for the guy who's trying to hold it to launch it, it's got to be tremendous.
I mean, forget the concussion force. You're giving a nuke and saying, here, fire this within visual range. It's basically a suicide mission. And I love the fact that they were like, yeah, it's a little bit more practical to fire it from the back of a Jeep, right? Which I think just gives so much more credit to it's a Jeep thing you wouldn't understand. So the idea here was that NATO, right, would have trouble stopping the Red Army just because of the sheer volume of armored units. So a specially trained infantry unit called the Atomic Battle Group would be deployed strategically at key choke points on the continent and launch the weapon. It would kill everyone within a 500-foot radius within minutes, mostly through extreme neutron radiation. A neutron bomb basically focuses more on just radiation poisoning and actually generally leaves structures intact. So it wouldn't blow up a tank so much as it would just kill the crew inside because of the intense radiation. And then, obviously there would be fallout within a particular radius and range and go downwind from there. So any crew in the tanks would be killed instantly, right? Basically disabling the tanks. And then any infantry regiments that were attached to the armor would also be killed pretty much instantaneously. The idea was to slow down the enemy and buy time for the Allied forces to rally and assume defensive positions or to counterattack, whatever the particular plan was. They only thought they were buying themselves up to 48 hours of time with this weapon, but they're like, it's enough just to get us situated right before we get overrun. And yet, again, it was a pretty rudimentary weapon. It was not like modern artillery that is like super accurate and fires over a very long distance. I want to quote from armyhistory.org. Since the launch tube was smoothbore, accuracy was always a problem. Nevertheless, what the Davy Crockett lacked in accuracy, it made up for in power. Although the initial radiation created by the detonation of the W-54 warhead would be as lethal to the enemy, if not more so, than the heat and blast effects. Since the warhead also posed a threat to the crew firing it, the Army recommended that soldiers manning the Davy Crockett select firing positions in sheltered locations, such as the rear slope of a hill. Soldiers were also encouraged to keep their heads down to protect themselves from the warhead's detonation. End quote. Basically, fire and duck is the military manual on the Davy Crockett.
God. It just tells you, like, we've made it this far because we've at least had a few right-minded people to say, I don't think this is a good idea, and I overrule you.
I feel this adds a really meaningful twist to the Second Amendment debate, is should you be allowed to own a personal Davy Crockett device?
Oh, God. I could see it now. Somebody walking down the street with one on their back. Hey, it's open carry.
So let's stick with the military for a little bit. So, Adam, I'm sure you know we have nuclear-powered craft, right? All of our aircraft carriers
like subs and stuff, yeah.
are nuclear powered, and I think like some 70 of our submarines are nuclear powered as well. And well, at least the subs that we know about, right? At least publicly. Right. And they operate on a system, right? How the nuclear reactor works is essentially it's a closed loop. It generates heat. That heat warms up steam turbines. And so it's a double stage system for, pretty straightforward for how it works. And do you know how like a traditional internal combustion engine works?
You mean like small explosions that spin things like in a car?
Yes, exactly. Right. It's a compressed air fuel mixture that gets lit on fire to create a small explosion, and the explosions push a piston, and the pistons operate in sequence to turn the drive shaft, which creates mechanical energy and power. Yes, that's how a traditional system works. So the Advanced Research Project Agency, or ARPA, goes, well, what if we combine those two concepts and created an engine that used a series of nuclear explosions to generate propulsion?
Mm-hmm. I could see that.
So
really tiny.
Well, so enter Project Orion. So in 1958, ARPA, their very first space-related project was a grant to study this concept, and it was assigned to the General Dynamics Corporation. I'm going to quote from a write-up in Interesting Engineering. The idea behind Project Orion was simple, at least conceptually. Use atomic bombs to generate thrust that could lift the ship into space. This was the original challenge that General Atomics hoped to overcome. The project decided to develop a concept proposed in a 1955 paper by Stanislav Ulam and Cornelius Everett. They suggested that bombs could be ejected backwards from the vehicle, followed by solid propellant disks. The explosions would vaporize the disks, and the resulting plasma would impinge upon a pusher plate. Of course, one bomb wouldn't be enough to get a ship fully into space, so a chain of atomic explosions would be needed in quick succession to keep the ship from falling back to Earth. End quote.
No, yes, I remember that, because that was a thought for a while about space travel, to use something like that while you were in space.
Yes, exactly. No, they were like, we're going to do this to get off the ground and through the atmosphere into space. Adam, do you want to guess that based on the Orion class and Super Orion class ships that they were developing at the time and scoping out for this, how many bombs they would need to launch in sequence to make this happen?
I guess the question would be, are they factoring how strong the bombs are, or are they factoring that we should make them small so we would need more of them? I'm going to say
yes.
5.
5?
Yes.
800.
So it's going to be real. They're thinking small because they know that they're too big would kill them. All right. So they're smarter than a 5th grader, but not much.
800 bombs, each about the size of a small compact car,
That's how big they would be?
Would explode beneath the ship at a rate of about 1 every second in order to push it into orbit.
So theoretically impossible, because it would have to be enormous of a ship to hold something the size of a car and hold 800 of them to drop.
Yes, it was a little bit of a catch-22. Yeah, the design of the ship had to be massive. One, to withstand the shock of the explosions, right, and the propellant thrust that was being created by it, but also it had to store 800, Prius-sized bombs and propellant disks and launch them in sequence once every second for 800 seconds, right? Or roughly whatever that time frame. And that would get the ship into orbit. So yeah, so it sounds absolutely batshit when you put those numbers into perspective, right? 800 straight bombs. You know what the crazy thing is? Those chemical rockets, this like the Saturn V that we ultimately developed to take out, for the Apollo project to go to the moon. They were like, this proposal, these nuclear propellant engines for Project Orion, were like 13 to 14 times more efficient at generating linear thrust and speed. So it's actually, it sounds nuts, but they were like, look, if we can develop this system, we can travel to Mars and Saturn within a matter of weeks. You can get to the moon within hours or days, right? At most. Like, it was a significant improvement.
But how many cars would you need? What size cars would you need? You need 10,000? We're looking at scale here. You're not saying it's like the size of our phone.
But remember, it's 1958. It's the Cold War. We had just developed the bomb and dropped the bomb 13 years earlier, right? So what happens when you have a hammer? Every solution, right? Every problem looks like a nail. And they're like, what the heck can we do with these things? What can we accomplish? We have all these bombs we're building. What else can we do other than drop them on, Japanese citizens? So the big problem, as always, with any of these is radiation. So just thinking about it, right? What we talked about with the whole bringing a nuclear reactor to the moon. If a single bomb misfired in the atmosphere or detonated on the platform, you'd have a massive contamination issue and radiological disaster.
Of course you would.
Unfortunately, and assuming all that went well, more pressing, each time a bomb went off, the astronauts on the ship would be exposed to 700 rads of radiation, which is 10 times the amount needed to trigger acute radiation syndrome in a human being. So 10 times the amount of radiation per bomb times 800 bombs. The whole project would have cooked the crews of the ships alive within a matter of, seconds.
That's insane.
Yeah. So I think it's suffice to say, no nuclear tests were ever conducted as a proof of concept, but they were able to validate this with conventional weapons fire using this whole explosives into a pusher plate with a propellant disc element. So it can work in theory. Ultimately, the program was shelved after the 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty, which banned nuclear explosions in the atmosphere and in outer space, right? So basically, we signed off on not doing this exact thing. The cool part is that actually the core concepts of Project Orion, like I said, they tested this with conventional weaponry and they validated it. They're actually scientifically sound. And frankly, they have been used for several next generation designs and plans for how are we going to get faster engines and how are we going to actually speed up travel through outer space. And, namely, they all approach this whole let's not melt the astronauts in the process while doing it element. Right. So it's actually pretty cool. I'm not going to go into those. They're very cool. They're worth taking a look. Just Google Project Orion and dig in on some of the on some of the outcomes, but some interesting things there. I think one of them actually has a theoretical speed that's 10% of the speed of light once you're up to max speed, which is like you can actually start to do interstellar travel at that point. Cool. Yeah, it's actually cool stuff. So Project Pluto was similar proposal to Project Orion, but instead of rocket ship engines, it was for cruise missile engines. The idea was a small nuclear reactor would heat and expand air in front of an intake, and then it would propel that air through a nozzle to generate thrust. Really not all that dissimilar from a modern jet turbine engine on any passenger liner. The two engines were actually successfully built and tested in Nevada, and they were designed such that they could cruise at Mach 3, and the ship itself could operate at low altitude, so only about 500 feet or so off the ground. So from a military perspective, you can go triple the speed of sound, and you can avoid radar defenses. So This is actually, it's actually a pretty cool idea, right? The concept was the craft would fly low and fast, and it would be equipped with a series of multiple nuclear warheads. So as it's flying over its path, it would drop them, and essentially you couldn't defend against it, right? It's too low, too fast, and it would just drop nuke as it kind of went down its path. And the idea was, of course, at the end, you could just slam the ship itself once it's dropped its payload into a target as well, right? So it itself was a cruise missile at the time. Now, here's the problem. Again, radiation. Superheating the air using a nuclear reactor and then propelling it for thrust behind just generates a ton of fallout just coming out of the jet's wake. So essentially, every single thing that this cruise missile would fly over, this Project Pluto engine would fly over, it would just basically irradiate it completely with fallout at this point. So from a practical perspective, you couldn't actually launch this weapon from the US. You couldn't launch it from an aircraft carrier or from a friendly nation because you would just kill everyone underneath it and at the launch site and anyone that it flew over before it got to its target. So you kind of had to basically be within the borders of the Soviet Union at the time to launch and attack the Soviet Union with this weapon, which is a touch problematic, right? I don't think they wanted us to do that. And I don't think we would have, they would have given us permission if we asked nicely. Right, the second problem,
we have to invade and we got to make it at least a couple 100 feet in, and then we could use them.
Basically, right? You had to basically go on shore at that point to do it. And then, by the way, you'd most likely kill the crew the launch crew because of the fallout that's coming straight out of the backwash of the engine. The bigger problem, Adam, what do you know? And you kind of mentioned this earlier. What do you know about a nuclear reactor once you start it?
Oh, you have a really hard time stopping it.
Correct. You couldn't shut down the engine once it started. So basically, if this missile didn't crash into its final intended target, it would just fly around the world indefinitely until it spent all its fuel, just irradiating everyone and everything underneath it.
I could just imagine this thing zigzagging all over the place. And then multiples of them, because they wouldn't just be launching one probably. Holy crap.
I think the stated range on this was over 100,000 miles, or at least that was kind of the spec. So essentially, it would crisscross the Earth 4 times before it would finally run out of energy and crash.
Oh my god! How insane is that? There's that missile again.
Yeah, so I feel like
killing everybody in its wake as it tries by. Oh, there it is! There I went. That.
I feel like it's low-hanging fruit to just beat up on the military, because the military just comes up with absolutely batshit insane ideas. It's like, can we do this? And then everyone goes, yeah, you could, but why would you want to? Right? That's pretty standard for military weapons development. So I think we should move on to civilian uses of this stuff. Did you ever hear of Project Plowshare?
No.
Okay.
You know what a plow? Mr. Plow, Homer Simpson, Mr. Plow, yes. But not Plowshare.
Can you do the song? Can you do the song?
Oh, God, I don't think I can remember. Mr. Plow, you know his name, it's Mr. Plow. No, I don't remember it all.
I think that was actually a pretty good effort. I respect you trying that. So Project Plowshare, and Plowshare, it's a biblical term, right? Turn swords into plowshares. Basically, stop being at war and plant, right? And kind of, build crops and stuff. So Project Plowshare was the part of the PNE, or Peaceful Nuclear Explosions program. It was designed to experiment with non-military uses for nuclear explosions, such as large-scale excavation and earth moving for projects such as canals, dams, and harbors, the extraction of oil and natural gas, and the creation of underground storage reservoirs. I was going to do a whole little thing here. I'm actually just going to quote from its Wikipedia entry because it's unintentionally hilarious. Quote, proposed uses for nuclear explosives under the Project Plowshare included widening the Panama Canal, constructing a new sea level waterway through Nicaragua, nicknamed the Pan-Atomic Canal, cutting paths through mountainous areas for highways, and connecting inland river systems. Other proposals involved blasting caverns for water, natural gas, and petroleum storage. Serious consideration was also given to using these explosives for various mining operations. One proposal suggested using nuclear blasts to connect underground aquifers in Arizona. Another plan involved surface blasting on the western slope of California's Sacramento Valley for a water transportation project. One of the first serious cratering proposals that came close to being carried out was Project Chariot, which would have used several hydrogen bombs to create an artificial harbor at Cape Thompson, Alaska. It was never carried out due to concerns for the native population and the fact that there was little use for the harbor to justify its risk and expense. End quote.
It's funny because you think he's like, well, we use a lot of dynamite and things to blow up and make these go through these mountains. Well, what if we used a bigger bomb? Like a nuclear bomb. You got to jump to the nuclear bomb. That's a great idea. Oh, the radiation. God damn it, the radiation. Yep, that might be a problem.
Yep, loads and loads of radiation, right? You think about it, right?
In our water, that's probably a problem.
Cheap, fast, good. It's always pick two. It turns out using nukes to carve waterways contaminates the water and the ground that it travels through. And it also turns out nukes are more expensive than conventional means. So, in other words, using nukes, largely, this whole project boiled down to fast. Fast was the only advantage. Mm-hmm. And it didn't even matter because there was so much contamination of the grounds that things were basically not usable after they tried to do them. Yeah, I love that so many of them was about water. My favorite, though, did you catch the part about natural gas when I mentioned that?
Yes,
in the middle of all those water projects?
To drill for that, basically.
They wanted to use nukes for fracking. It's bad enough that we drill and use dynamite currently. They wanted to nuke natural gas reservoirs and oil reservoirs.
We are a nation of speed. Without the thought of once we blow it up, assume that there's no long-term radiation. Well, how do we access the ground now to like clean it up to make room for what we need to do? We can't? Ah, crap. That doesn't work either.
There's so much about this. Like, I don't know why we're greenlighting this project. Maybe we're doing it just because we can, right? But we don't, we never, it was that line from Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether they could, they didn't stop to ask if they should.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just the fact that they have recorded it and kept it without saying, oh my God, this was such a stupid idea. Just shred it. Nobody needs to know that we had this idea even.
No, Adam, for about a 12-year period between 1961 and 1973, we conducted 35 separate test explosions, ranging from 1 kiloton bombs to 104 kiloton bombs to validate proof of concept on these things. 35 different 35 different detonations. It was for 28 different projects that we did these things. That largest one, by the way, that 104 kiloton bomb, was the Sedan test, which has become actually a little bit infamous. It was conducted at Area 10 in Nevada, and it resulted in a crater over 300 feet deep, nearly a quarter mile wide, and registered seismic waves equivalent to a 4.75 earthquake on the Richter scale.
Jeez.
It displaced some 12 million tons of soil. But that single blast, because of prevailing winds, ended up spreading some 7% of the total radioactive fallout from all U.S. nuclear tests that ended up affecting the population.
Lovely.
Yeah, good times. Now, here's the fun part, though. You can visit the Sedan crater. You can actually tour it. You can walk through it. It is actually a tourist destination. I believe it's.
I imagine.
I believe it's under the Parks Department purview. Yeah, so you can go see that if you're ever in Nevada and you've used up all your money at the roulette table. Go check out the Sedan crater.
I don't think I've been around there and I've seen a crater, but I don't think I've seen that crater. I think that one I would remember that it was man-made, not natural. But then again, who knows?
Yeah, there's a handful of them. I visited, oh my God, it's Meteor Crater in Arizona once with my brother-in-law. We were on a road trip.
That was
that one's based from a meteor, right? And it's actually really cool. It's actually pretty trippy to go through it. It was very cool. But I was pretty confident I wasn't going to get, cancer just by visiting. Now, that's the background radiation is not meaningful in any sort of way at this point. But yeah, it was once upon a time, and it spread some serious fallout.
Do we have like a big like sign that just points to it, like we did that, like a sense of pride?
Either pride or a warning or a little bit of both, knowing that this is America. Yeah, we would definitely both. That's how we do it.
Oh, goodness gracious.
So, by the way, it wasn't just the U.S. exploring peaceful uses.
I'm sure.
Under Project Plowshare. So my personal favorite, and it was actually one of the inspirations for this episode, once I heard about the reactor on the moon, and I learned about this one a few years ago, is the Ben Gurion Canal Project. So for this part, I'm relying on a declassified report published by the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. This is not a quote. I'm just, I've summarized it. So in 1963, the lab sketched out a proposal for a 160-mile long canal connecting the Mediterranean just north of the present-day Gaza Strip with the Gulf of Aqaba on the opposite side of the Sinai Peninsula from the Gulf of Suez and its canal. So basically the very far south tip of Israel, if you think about the shape of it on a map. Approximately 30 of those miles could be dug with normal conventional means, but the remaining 130 were considered too difficult for conventional digging. It was a mountainous, rocky terrain, a lot of elevation changes, right? It just wasn't economically feasible to do that. So those 130 miles would be dug with a series of 520 2-kiloton nuclear devices spaced a quarter mile apart in order to dig a canal at an average depth of 750 feet and 1,000 feet wide.
Wow.
Yeah,
so
ambitious.
A lot of craters strung together.
Exactly, right? Let's just nuke these sequentially, right? To just dig a giant crater or a canal in the ground, giant trench, essentially. So yeah, Adam, I don't know how familiar you are with canals, but 1,000 feet wide and 750 feet deep on average is huge. That is massive. The reason for that was a typical canal operates on a system of locks.
Locks, yeah.
Right.
It's like a one-way system usually, right?
Exactly. It's a drawback, right? It's a one-way system. So, if you think about the Panama Canal, you've got ships queuing up on the Pacific side and you've got ships queuing up on the Atlantic side, or it's Gulf of Mexico technically, right? No, excuse me. No, it's the Atlantic.
Gulf of America.
America. Yeah, no. So you've got them lining up on either side, on either ocean, on either side, and it only goes one direction. Right. And you've got to do one boat at a time, and there's like elevation changes. So basically you enter this little pool and then they basically lower the water or raise the water level, right, to kind of get you to the next one. You move through sequentially. It's slow, it's inefficient, but it gets the job done. The idea here was they didn't want to build the locks. This is 130 miles of uninhabited and uninhabitable desert. They didn't want to have these crews managing this shit. They didn't want to have all this equipment. It just would have been a logistical nightmare. So they basically just wanted to dig a hole large enough in the ground that modern ships could comfortably fit side by side and travel two directional without all this extra technology in the process. So it had two core issues that didn't go through. One, the lab estimated its cost at $575 million at the time in 1963, which is about $6.1 billion today. I feel like given every single quoted project, right, in New York City, just to, do a subway, station renovation, it's pretty much the same amount of money. So 6.1 billion doesn't sound crazy to me, but maybe I'm just used to these large numbers for major excavation projects.
It's just a few bridges. That's all. It's nothing.
Let's assume, right, that number is 2 or 3 times smaller than it actually would be, right? But anyway, again, it was a bunch of scientists doing the math, not actual, project managers and stuff like that. So,
and you got to also figure they're not going to have no union labor over there. So,
logistically, Israel in 1963 was not Israel of 2025, right? Logistically and economically and all that. So yeah, it's a little bit of a different. Again, this was under Project Plowshare. So, and this is before Israel was, before the relationship we have currently with it, right? They were still very much, the French were actually the big influence on them economically and, and whatnot at this time. So yeah, I found it interesting that we were getting involved then with this. The second one, of course, again, 1963, the report notes another problem which has not been considered is that of political feasibility, as it is likely that the Arab countries surrounding Israel would strongly object to the construction of such a canal. Which I feel like is the understatement of the century. Yeah, the Gulf of Aqaba, where this canal would go out, is one side of it is Egypt, the other side of the Sinai Peninsula. A strip of it is Jordan, and then the rest of it is Saudi Arabia, which in 1963, not one of those was big fans of the Israelis. Yeah, they were not buddy-buddy. So I can't imagine that they would be like, yeah, you can go through this waterway, our territorial waters, unquestioned. The Soviet Union also had a similar program as Project Plowshare, and they explored a lot of the same use cases that the U.S. did. And naturally, because it's the Soviet Union, they used larger bombs on average, and they conducted about 4 times as many test explosions to test concepts as the U.S. did. Because again, it's the fucking Soviet Union. But I want to focus on one project in particular where they stood out, because almost everything they did was the same as what we did, right? They didn't have like really any original ideas. One key thing, remember I talked about natural gas and oil? They actually ended up, sometimes when you have like those accidents, think about like the Deepwater Gulf incidents. Was that 2011, 2012, BP? The Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf. One of the proposals at the time was use a nuke to seal off the spill and to seal off the fires at the time. That was actually developed by the Soviets because they would come into these industrial accidents with their natural gas extraction processes, and they actually developed a process for, we use a nuke to seal the entrance and to end the incident, right, and the fire.
Wow.
So it's actually a pretty interesting one that we've actually, I don't want to say we've adopted it, but it's actually a practical use case that came out of it. That's not the one I want to focus on, though. I want to focus on one project in particular. Do you remember, Adam, the Aral Sea, Aral?
No, I do not.
Okay. So the Aral Sea was once the world's 3rd largest lake. But starting in the 1960s, it began shrinking. And within 50 years, by 2010 or so, it was all but gone. And is largely, I forget the name of it off the top of my head. I don't have it written down here, but it's been renamed a desert, whatever it's called. The reason for this was that there was a series of irrigation and water diversion projects to provide water for crops in Uzbekistan. And if you think about Russian geography for a second, you've got largely in the middle, you've got these steppes, which are grassy plains, right? Covering a huge swath of the country going east to west. That's where, when you think about like Genghis Khan and the Mongols, right? They rode their horses through this. This is the Dothraki in Game of Thrones, right? On the grassy plains. That's what the steppes are in Russia. That's the inspiration for it. To the north of that, you have boreal forest and tundra, right? It's a frozen, largely frozen wasteland. And to the south, you have deserts, because you're bordering on Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, and all those areas. They don't border Iraq, but Iran and all the stands. And so the idea was, they basically had these plans. Let's bring water from where it's abundant in the middle, all these rivers that are feeding the Aral Sea, and let's divert them to the south where there isn't a lot of water in order to grow crops and to grow the economy by selling these crops, right? Pretty straightforward. Diverting the rivers that fed the Aral wasn't part of the Soviet nuclear program, the peaceful nuclear program. I bring it up because it gives us context for what the Soviets did next. So they've deliberately destroyed the Aral Sea. This is actually like the Politburo or whatever, ministry or whatever. The leadership knew that they were going to destroy the sea by diverting, but they're like, we need the economic output, right? We're rebuilding after the war. So they're like, I don't care. And this was the early 60s, right? The 50s. You didn't speak up. You didn't have freedom of speech to, especially if you're lower down the line, you're a scientist, you're like, hey, there's a major problem. You shut the fuck up or you're sent over to the gulags. So they've deliberately destroyed the Aral Sea, but they still needed more water. They didn't have enough. And if you know anything about that kind of Central Asian area, again, the stands, right? Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and all them, water rights is still a major issue for them, even today in 2025, and is a major area of geopolitical tension for them. So remember how I said the geography is basically tundra north, plains mid, desert south? Well, a lot of the rivers in Russia flow north, and they dump their water into the Arctic Sea. And Soviet planners looked at that and they're like, well, we're Russia. We have a ton of natural resources. That's a wasted resource. So, you want to guess what they decided to do, Adam?
I don't know if I could guess. They're going to nuke something. That's all I know.
They decided to try and redirect Russia's rivers to flow
south?
North to south instead of south to north. They decided to redirect the rivers.
Interesting.
Yeah. So from a write-up by the BBC, the idea of using canals and dams to redirect fresh water from Russia's north-flowing rivers had been around for a century by the time of the blasts, tempting successive Russian regimes. Perhaps most famously, it was proposed by writer Igor Demchenko in an 1871 booklet called On Flooding the Aral-Caspian Lowlands to Improve the Climate of Adjacent Countries. Later, it was raised as a possibility by Soviet planners under Stalin in the 1930s. The appeal was simple. Some of the huge volumes of water flowing through Siberia and northern Russia could be utilized by sending them to the more arid lands of Central Asia and southern Russia. Agriculture is a lucrative prospect in the Eurasian heartlands, where there are many more people than in the freezing Russian north. The redirected water, planners hoped, could also help save the Aral Sea, which had seen catastrophic water loss in recent decades because its tributaries were overexploited for agriculture. For this next part, I'm going to draw on a report by the World Nuclear Association. This isn't a quote. This is my write-up, but I'm relying on the World Nuclear Association's description of it. So, enter the Kama-Pechora Canal Project. This was the Kama-Pechora Canal Project was a plan to connect the basin of the Pechora River with that of the Kama River, which was one of the tributaries of the Volga, which is a major river. If you know anything about geography, right, in the area, you've heard of the Volga. And they wanted to redirect that water to the Caspian Sea, which is another one that was kind of shrinking a little bit, right, because of overuse in agriculture. The canal would span 112 kilometers, and they would use nukes to excavate the middle 65 kilometers of the canal through higher elevation areas. Their plan was to use some 250 to 300 bombs, detonating them in rounds of 20, with a planned total yield of 3,000 kilotons. Just for scale, Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. So this is 200 times the Hiroshima bomb in aggregate. So They ran a pair of successful tests, and they've got approval in 1969 to move ahead of this project. In February of 1971, outside the village of Vasiukovo, the first major test happened under the code name Taiga. The Soviets drilled a little over 400 feet deep and fired a trio of 15-kiloton Hiroshima-sized bombs that were clean, meaning that they had very low fission yield, which limited fallout, right? They were kind of like, we know fallout's going to be a problem. We don't want to contaminate everything. Turns out, and they only learned this after the explosions, that the soil and the territory, right, that they were trying to carve through was very sedimentary or alluvial. And turns out it's totally unsuitable for the project because while the fallout from the bombs was limited, there were elements in the soil like cobalt and nickel and others. And the explosions changed them from their stable, inert forms into their radioactive isotope forms.
Oh, God.
And so the result was basically the fallout from the bombs itself. Cool, no problem. It dissipated right pretty quickly as planned, but we just fucking turned everything else into a radioactive wasteland in the process.
Jesus.
So do you think that stopped the Russians?
Oh, God, no. All I know is when you said that, it just reminded me of my son's Pete the Cat book. Did that stop Pete the Cat? Oh, hell no. Goodness, no. Oh, goodness, no. He just kept singing his song.
It's like Belushi in Animal House is like, was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? No. Right? No. Continuing from the BBC's article, I'm quoting here. Awesome. In addition to the Volga, those laboring over river reversal in the 1970s focused on two Siberian rivers. So again, we're moving forward in time here, right? The Ob and the Irtysh. They planned the construction of a 1,500 kilometer longer, 930 mile canal using hundreds of peaceful nuclear explosions that would, when completed, channel up to 10% of the water from the basins of the Ob River and the Irtysh River to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. So remember that super ambitious Israeli canal, the Ben Gurion Canal?
Yeah.
This canal that they're proposing, because again, Russia, is going to be 6 times longer than that one.
That's right. You got to go bigger. Go bigger, go home.
Absolutely. Wildly expensive and stupidly ambitious. So, and you remember I mentioned, right, those earlier proposals that led to the destruction of the Aral Sea, scientists, planners, engineers, they were like, this is going to fuck up the sea. You can't divert this much water. This is disastrous. Yeah, you created all these cash crops like cotton in Kazakhstan and whatnot, but you destroyed like all of the fishing and farming locally around the Aral Sea, right? It may have been like a slight net positive economically, but you basically impoverished and destroyed life for all these residents around this ocean, around this sea. This lake. And so now we're like, 15, 20 years on later, and people know about it. They're like, we've seen what happens. So they saw the failed experiment at Kama Pechora, right? That just basically created, radioactive land and waterways. They had direct evidence now that the Aral Sea was dying. It was no longer theoretical. It had been passing out for years and it was shrinking. And in generally, there was test ban treaties and just a lot more concern from civilians globally around the use of nuclear weapons. So basically, progress all but came to a halt. So they never moved ahead with this, 900-mile long canal that they were going to build.
What happened to those poor people in the village that it was just outside that they started it?
It was a small village. I don't know. There's signs and fences to like keep people from going there, but you can visit it. It's like Chernobyl. You can visit the Chernobyl site. Like there's just signs and warnings, but it's not like there's guards turning you away. You just have to be like, bring a dosimeter to understand what your radiation levels are, right? And you got to get out of there if you happen to step in a hot spot. Is essentially what it is.
It's like when you used to go to the museum and you'd get the little Walkman with the headphones to know where you're going. Mm-hmm. Here it's like, oh, nope, too much radiation this way. Let's go this way. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, essentially, right? So yeah, it's actually, touring these, again, and the Sedan crater that we created, right? It's a tourist site. Like it's a national park at this point that we created. So so you can go to these places, but again, like certain ones of them, especially this Russians one, where there's kind of like all this incidental radiation that we created, you got to be extra careful. Yeah. And honestly, this whole progress, they were actually not going to stop this. They were still like, we want to do this. We still want to divert water. Because again, like I said, in 2025, water rights and access to waterways is still a major thing for all the stands And, it continues to be kind of like a geopolitical hot button for all of them. How are they going to share this fairly and whatnot? So even through to the end of the Soviet Union's time, this was still a project that was on the table, and they were trying to figure out how to make it work. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the economic and political fallout from Chernobyl, pun intended, put an end to it, right? Just they had to throw so much time and resources at this that, there's just no more appetite for nukes. And by the way, we've wrecked our economy just trying to deal with the fallout from this particular incident that it ended, and then the Soviet Union collapsed, right? So game over. You want to come back to America, Adam?
I was enjoying the trip around the world, but
Yeah,
sure.
Well, you got to think to yourself a little bit in the back of your head. You got to be like, hold on. We went to Russia and some batshit crazy ideas. How the hell does America one up this? How do we continue to scale this upwards?
Don't deny America its greatness and being able to even one up you on stupidity.
No one can outstupid us. We can outstupid.
We'll outsmart you and outstupid you. That we won't let you outdo us in anything.
The duality of man right there. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So Project Cirrus was a 1940s experiment or project or concept to weaken hurricanes by seeding the storms with dry ice. You ever hear of this?
Yes, I've heard about seeding storms for like ever now, but I'm dying to know how you can factor in nuclear stuff.
Well, so the idea was, and again, this was the 1940s. The idea was, hey, fly over the eye of the hurricane, drop in dry ice. The idea being the dry ice is going to freeze a lot of the moisture in the storm and is going to weaken it, mitigating the impact. They decided to do a test run of this when Hurricane King was in the Atlantic. Unfortunately, it ended up not working, and no one knows if it was because of the seeding or it just happened anyway. Hurricane King took a sudden, sharp turn and slammed into Georgia and caused millions of dollars of damage. And people were pissed. They're like, what the fuck are you doing? Right.
Wow. So they thought originally that it was on a path that it wasn't going to hit anything. So this was a great opportunity to test it.
Exactly.
And then it just said, oh, wow, we course corrected it. Okay.
Basically, I think they thought it was just going to kind of like go up the coast, but not make landfall at any point and just peter out in the ocean, which happens. Right. But yeah, this, and we see this all the time with current hurricanes, right? They take a sudden, sharp, unexpected turn. It just happens. Not necessarily anything to do with the dry ice seeding, but basically they were like, you did this and then it turned, so you fucked it up, right? And people were like, don't do this again. So coming back to Project Plowshare, in 1961, or fast forward, right, 20 years or so, under that broad umbrella of Project Plowshare, Francis Reichelderfer, who was the head of the U.S. Weather Bureau, he publicly speculated about the possibility of detonating a nuclear bomb. He's the first one to do it inside a hurricane to disrupt it. I'm going to quote from a National Geographic write-up. In a speech delivered at the National Press Club on October 11th, 1961, Francis W. Reichelderfer, the head of the U.S. Weather Bureau, said he could imagine the possibility someday of exploding a nuclear bomb on a hurricane far at sea. Although, comfortingly, Reichelderfer added that the Weather Bureau would not begin acquiring its own nuclear arsenal until we know what we're doing. End quote.
I do wait for the weatherman Storm Champion. Oh my God!
Can you imagine that?
Nuke Storm.
You turn on Mr. G is talking about he's gonna use his personal nuclear arsenal to take on the bad weather and give you a sunny weekend.
Oh my God,
that's amazing. So Jack Reed, who's a meteorologist at Sandia Laboratory, who studied atmospheric effects produced by America's first detonation of the hydrogen bomb. He was kind of there on site doing a test. And he saw that when the hydrogen bomb went off, all this air got displaced into the upper atmosphere. And so he theorized that a 20 megaton nuclear explosion could disrupt hurricane dynamics by replacing the warm air in the eye of the storm with cooler air. And his calculations were that he could slow down a storm with 100-knot peak winds down to 50 knots using that 20 megaton nuke. Quoting again from National Geographic. In his paper, Reed speculated that a submarine could travel underwater to penetrate the eye of a hurricane where it would launch and detonate one or more nuclear missiles. The ensuing explosion would loft most of the relatively warm air in the hurricane's eye high above the storm into the stratosphere. The warm air would then be replaced by colder, denser air, reducing the wind speed and weakening the storm. So this is why, if you ever visit the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's website, there's an entire section in the FAQ dedicated to the question of why don't we just nuke hurricanes? I think to their credit, they're a bunch of science nerds, and the FAQ answer they give is extremely technical, but I've kind of condensed it down here a little bit. The short version is that fully formed hurricanes give off heat energy equivalent to a 10 megaton nuclear blast happening every 20 minutes. And that of that heat energy that gets generated, maybe 10% of that is converted into mechanical energy that creates the wind that the hurricane's known for, that we're worried about. Even a single small hurricane generates more energy than all the collective human energy consumption per year back in the year 1990. So if you think about all power usage 30 years ago, one hurricane, and it's probably like a factor of 2 to 3 times that much usage now. So the scale's probably not that far off, but like a hurricane generates that more power than we consume in a single year as a species. So that's a pre-crypto number. So don't quote me too hard on that one.
But I think we just made some scientific breakthrough here, because now what we should be doing is transitioning to how could we harness these hurricanes to power our world. Can we lasso it and just keep it in place and just let it keep spinning while it powers everything? That seems like it'd be more sense than nuking it.
I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I had the same idea. Like, how could we possibly take advantage of this? And I'm sure smarter people than you or I have actually, considered that. So the short answer, again, kind of translating the NOAA's FAQ here is, nuking hurricanes is like dropping literal drops in a bucket compared to the strength and power of a hurricane. And it's going to make no effect other than just to irradiate the air and spread fallout.
Yeah, that's what
across the trade winds, right? It's just not going to do it. Now, there's a second option here, right? Which is, okay, well, the hurricane's already formed. It's super powerful. Nuke's not going to do anything. So why don't we beat them to the punch and nuke them before they form, right? We can track tropical depressions as they're forming over, off the coast of Africa. Here's the thing, though. The way it maths out is only about 5 out of every 80 tropical depressions in any given season end up becoming hurricanes. It's a very, it's a very low percentage type of deal, right? And it's never clear which ones of them are actually going to form into hurricanes versus the ones that just end up petering out and just being a small storm. So we'd have to be nuking every single tropical depression that happens in the hope that we'd get to the hurricane. And in the meantime, we'd just be spreading fallout into the ocean and the airstream continually off the coast of Africa.
It's just amazing that now I'm so fascinated that how lucky we are that hurricanes are not more destructive since they have that much power.
Yeah, it's kind of wild, right?
I mean, my God.
Well, that's where, honestly, we're not stupid as a species. That's why, Florida has building codes around hurricanes. That's why California has building codes around earthquakes. We can math these things out. We know how they work, and we can plan for them appropriately, right? The problem is, of course, I don't want to get off topic here, right? But climate change, whether or not you believe it's man-made or man-impacted, right? We are seeing more incidents, right, of extreme weather at more frequent intervals that we have historically. That is an indisputable fact that these things are happening more often and at greater strength than they were. And so, it's just a matter of, can we continue to keep up with this? And by the way, at one point, does the economic cost of keeping up, preemptively with building codes and or rebuilding after the fact start to outweigh just the cost of addressing the problem in the first place, right? And kind of changing the way we live and approach these things. We're in a transitional period around it.
Yeah, we'll let ourselves get there, I'm sure. We'll get to that point where it's too expensive not to.
Is it going to happen in our lifetimes or not is kind of the question here. What's the speed and scale of it? Adam, last little bit. How you feeling so far?
I learned some shit today, so I'm pretty good.
All right. Have I depressed you as per usual?
No.
Okay.
No. This is not, because this is all like silly or past stuff. But I mean, it just makes me think that people just think of all kinds of shit. But that hurricane thing was fascinating.
We are nothing if not a creative species.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for this last one, Adam, before we get into it, let's play a quick word association game, right? I'll say a word and you say the first thing that comes to mind. All right.
Okay.
You ready? Space lasers.
Star Wars.
Okay. That's a good one, right? And when you think of Star Wars and you think of the 80s, what else do you think of?
Ronald Reagan.
Yes, correct. I'm a little disappointed you didn't say Jews. Or
Spaceballs.
Lie. I need to get Marjorie Taylor Greene as my guest at some point.
Well, she does think we're seeding those clouds with God knows what and chemtrails,
Yes, exactly.
and so.
Absolutely. Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, nicknamed Star Wars by Ted Kennedy back in the 80s. So I don't know about you, but when I think of SDI, I think of like ground and space-based laser systems that just never worked, right? It was just a giant technological boondoggle. We promised so much and we just underdelivered. Totally pie-in-the-sky tech that never materialized, and really its best impact was as propaganda against the Soviet Union, right? About what our capabilities would and could be. So I think for our audience, if you're young and totally unfamiliar, or you're old like you and me, Adam, actually weirdly decent example of what the SDI or Star Wars initiative looked like is actually from one of my favorite movies, which is 1985's Spies Like Us.
Oh, I love that movie.
Yes, it's one of my personal favorites. Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, and the Mujahideen, before stuff happened. I'm going to say this. In fact, stop listening. If you're listening to this podcast, all like 3 of you who subscribe to us so far, stop listening right now and go stream Spies Like Us. Go pirate it. Go download the torrent, right? And then once you're done with the movie, then come back and finish this episode.
Well, these are the old-time spoilers.
So specifically within SDI, I don't want to go over the whole damn thing. There's so much going on there. But I want to focus on Project Excalibur, which was the research program that worked to develop space-based X-ray laser system for use as a ballistic missile defense. And for this part, I'm going to lean heavily on a write-up by the Optica Foundation. The first laser was demonstrated in 1960 by Ted Maiman, or Maiman, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. And by the 1970s, scientists had pushed the technology through the electromagnetic spectrum, from infrared all the way down to ultraviolet. If you remember your high school physics at all, that means going from longer than visible light wavelengths to shorter than visible light wavelengths. And for a project like Star Wars, you want short wavelengths like X-rays because those are the most powerful. They pack the most energy in them. And so if you're going to generate enough destructive force to destroy an ICBM, you have to have the shortest wavelength possible. Otherwise, you're just going to paint them with a dot like a laser pointer, and you're going to hope that some stray cats take the missile down and put it off target. Like that's really what's going to happen, right? So you've got to go from infrared through to visible light down to like X-rays and ultraviolet light. But there was a problem. To get those shorter wavelengths of light, they needed way more energy, and they also needed so much more energy to be provided as quickly as possible. So there was it wasn't just like, we need a lot of power for this. It was like, we need a lot of power instantaneously all at once. So this is a problem, and researchers were kind of working through this. In 1972, a bunch of researchers at the University of Utah working on the Umbrella Project here thought they had a breakthrough. They actually dissolved a solution of copper sulfate in Jell-O, and they smeared it on some microscope slides, and then they shot at it with lasers that they had on hand, and they shot it at a piece of X-ray paper, right, X-ray film. They were able to get results. They were able to make an impact on the X-ray. Like, holy shit, it worked. Turns out, they couldn't replicate it themselves, and no other scientist could ever replicate it. But I like the fact that Jell-O comes into the space race and space lasers. Yeah, it's interesting. So it's basically no success, right? And we're in the mid-70s now. And DARPA, which is now the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is what ARPA had evolved into. By 1976, they were overseeing all this laser development up until this point for the last 15, 16 years or so. They gave up on X-ray lasers. So it was like, this is a dead end, and we're going to focus on other laser technologies. So they handed over the job of X-ray laser development back to our friends over at Lawrence Livermore National Labs. Our nuke happy canal builders. once again. They're back in the picture. And so the Livermore scientists, they go, hey, you know what produces a lot of really intense X-rays in a really short amount of time? Nuclear explosions.
Yay!
Hey, woo, nuke. So the idea they came up with eventually boiled down to this. Surround a nuclear bomb with an array of 50 1 to 2 meter long thin rods made of lacing material. Basically, lacing material is the component that's going to capture the energy and convert it into the laser beam, and then focus the shot, right? When the bomb explodes, the X-rays would instantly generate the energy needed in each of these lacing rods for a brief moment, which would then fire at the intended target before the bomb's explosion would then destroy the lacing array. So essentially, if you think about spy, if you've watched Spies Like Us, or you've watched, you've played Call of Duty, or you've, any of these video games, like there's always these satellites in space that can fire the laser repeatedly. The whole scope and concept here was single time use, right? It was a bomb surrounded by the array and everything was destroyed the moment you went to use it, which in theory, right, if you were trying to defend, build a missile shield against, a whole, fleet of ICBMs coming to nuke the country, you don't need it to fire multiple times. You need it to just shoot one time at as many bombs as possible. So as many missiles as possible. So it's actually not as crazy of an idea.
So what's interesting is that it makes sense then why during the the space race and the nuclear armament building that Russia would want so many missiles, because if their defense is going to blow itself up, well, then we just need to overwhelm them with quantity of missiles. Well, that's interesting.
Yes, and this is part of the Star Wars initiative, the SDI initiative, that I actually didn't touch on because, again, it's a little out of scope for this conversation. But the way the math worked was that for every $1 of ICBM capability that was on the offensive side of the table, it took $20 to defend against it.
Wow.
So the way the math works is simple, is just overwhelming numbers. This is why we had a nuclear arms race, right? Because everyone knew the defense capabilities just could not keep up, and it was economically ruinous. So basically, just go all offense, no defense was the point. Yeah. So for this array that the Livermore guys came up with, before firing, each rod would be aimed separately at an enemy missile hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. And a single detonation would disable dozens of warheads all at once, right? Basic concept behind this thing. Kind of cool when you think about it, yeah. But there was a couple of problems. The first and foremost one, what was that lacing material going to be? They actually didn't have an answer on that. So they had to figure out what's going to successfully capture and focus the X-rays generated by the nuke and then cause them to fire, right? And this is a huge part of laser and optics development at the time frame. By 1980, they had successfully tested the concept in an underground facility in Nevada. They actually made it work. Adam, do you want to guess what the material was that ended up working?
Silk.
Ooh, okay. I like that. I thought you were going to guess Jell-O based on the previous comment.
If I was smarter, I would have.
No, it was weeds. They had grabbed some weeds growing in an abandoned parking lot and just shoved them in there. And it worked.
Huh.
Yeah. Imagine going up in front of Congress, being like the head of this project for SDI, and Reagan's out there. He's publicly promoting and whatnot, and explaining that the multi-billion-dollar SDI project, the Laser Defense Star Wars system, was powered by crabgrass.
It'd been so much better if it was actual hemp and weed. All right, guys, we need marijuana.
Well, I was just going to say, do you know how fast that, they would take marijuana off the schedule by the DA? But actually, it would be the opposite. They would lock that shit down harder than ever so that they could monopolize it for this whole process. Yeah,
It'll still make you crazy, but it's great for blowing shit up.
Exactly. So, holy shit, they've actually successfully tested this thing using crabgrass, basically, right? Just weeds growing in a parking lot. So Edward Teller, who was kind of the lead on this project, he's also the father of the hydrogen bomb, and he convinces Reagan, this is it. We've got it. This whole 50 laser array, nuke triggered, system is the way to go. And basically he gets the green light on this. And I think Reagan goes and makes his announcement shortly after this. So here's the thing. 3 major problems came up almost right away. The first is how do you aim these thin little, they call them like uncooked spaghetti was the terminology they use. How do you aim these 50 thin rods of crabgrass and, organic material at 50 different independent fast moving targets, right? Successfully. How do you do that at speed and accurately? Second, even if you can successfully aim them quickly and accurately, the bomb's explosion is still going to like shake everything before the lasers actually end up firing off, right? So it's like, think about like you're throwing a ball or something and your arm smacks something as you're going to throw. Like that ball's going wherever, right? That's the exact same problem. Like the X-rays are getting generated, but so is concussive force.
Right.
From the explosion. And lastly, and this is kind of the big one, are we really going to put nukes in space?
Back to nukes in space.
You've got this mutually assured destruction element of it, but at the same time, like, what's the purpose? Like, this is not actually politically or popular by anyone to actually bring nuclear weapons into space. Because what happens once you bring nuclear weapons into space? The other guys who have nuclear weapons are going to want to bring them into space, right? Mm-hmm. And now you just continually to escalate the arms race. It's not all that different from what you and I talked about last week, the years of lead in Italy, right? Political extremist violence just kept ratcheting up. So if we do this, then the Russians are going to do it, and then we're just going to be back to square one where we've all got nuke lasers in space pointing at each other. Like, what does that actually accomplish? So by 1985, it started to become just abundantly clear that Teller and all the other people working on this had just completely oversold the entire project and that it wasn't feasible. And this is what we know today. The lasers, they just never became strong enough to actually, to do what they had to do. They couldn't actually take down an ICBM in flight. They also couldn't aim the shots. They just never developed a system for accurately and quickly targeting and keeping them steady to fire. And again, the whole system was powered by weeds, parking lot weeds. So they scrapped the nuclear explosion powered space lasers and focused on other technologies instead. Now, I think it's interesting. I don't know if you missed the announcement, but back in May, Trump announced a Golden Dome project. Yeah. Did you see that?
Oh, yeah. He wants to, Israel's got the Iron Dome. We're going to have a Golden Dome.
Yeah. So basically, this is like the spiritual successor to SDI and the whole Star Wars project. And yeah, it's kind of it's a huge step up and step change from Israel's Iron Dome, right? It's the idea here, though, is it's essentially continental or global spanning, and they are going to leverage Starlink, SpaceX, Anduril, Palantir, and Lockheed Martin, either the hardware components or the technological components, to kind of build this thing out. And the idea is to be like cruise missile and an ICBM kind of counter defense, right? Mm-hmm. The idea being before China or North Korea or Russia could launch launch a missile at us, is to be able to destroy it. And honestly, it's come under a lot of the same criticism that Reagan's did, which is like, look, we have so much more advanced technology now, but this shit still isn't easy. And, even though we have so much more capability, it's still not really feasible to do a lot of this. Overall, a big part of this was all during the kind of Canada annexation conversation. And Canada was like, yeah, we want to sign on to this from a defense perspective. And he's like, well, it's going to cost you $61 billion to sign on, or you can just let us annex you as the 51st state. And they were like, no, thanks.
Oh, leave it to Trump. Never lets an opportunity go by.
Yeah. The crazy thing, and this might be worth digging in at some other point. Maybe you and I will cover it on one, like kind of more the daily conversations. I don't know if there's necessarily enough content, but one of the oversight agencies, remember that Doge gutted a whole bunch of solicitor generals and oversight agencies. Yeah. After the Golden Dome announcement came out, the oversight agency for this particular part of the space program, right? The Space Force, I forget the official name of Space Force, but the one that came in was like, the Space Force was nicknamed. It has like an official government name that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But basically, the Solicitor General and the group in charge of overseeing that was kind of like, you're going to spend a whole bunch of money. You don't have actually any of this capability. And then Musk just went and gutted them immediately. He's like, shut the fuck up. He's like, I'm about to get hundreds of billions of dollars in contracts from the government for my space companies. So yeah. And again, SpaceX, Starlink, Anduril, Palantir and Lockheed Martin, like, is just the worst party that you could possibly ever attend. Like, from like a moral or ethical perspective, right? These are just not, this is the worst defense contractors imaginable who are being involved in this. Yeah, so there's not a lot of ethics and qualms going on with this group. So on the surface, it looks like a grift, right? Just to funnel money to a lot of donors and supporters, under the auspices of this Golden Dome thing. We'll see how that ends up playing out. But again, Musk going in there and immediately gutting the oversight group the moment they were kind of like, you can't actually deliver on any of this, isn't exactly a, reassuring sort of sign around this.
Yeah. It's funny because when you said about the $1 for a missile equals $20 to like basically defend against it, it's like the same problem we're having now with drones. They send a $3,000 drone and we send $1 million missile to blow it up.
Yep.
Not cost effective.
I mean, this is, you and I also talked about this last week, right? I'm doing kind of the Cold War conversation, right? Is the whole George Orwell, right? His line about these weapons are either they provide tyrants and dictators and authoritarians more power, or they bring power to the people, right? So the Golden Dome is the type of weapon system that only a state can manage and create over the long term. But yeah, a $100 drone or a $3,000 drone is usable by an individual, right? And so you shoot down $3,000 drones of $1 million missiles, and the math, that's how the math works out. So it's kind of democratizing the weaponry at the same time. It's always this push pull between the two of them.
Wild.
Yeah, good times. All right, dude, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed.
It was good. I learned a shit ton. I'll say that much.
Yeah, like I said, I knew about I would say half of these before this, and I was kind of like, all right, I think there's like enough material to work with. And it's kind of, as I went down a rabbit hole, I'm like, this is way funnier and way crazier, all this other shit than I even imagined. So I was pretty happy with the way this one went.
I guess the funny aspect is that they really thought these were good ideas that they should really flush out. Like, you would think most of these things end at radiation and usability afterwards. It's like, all right, that's it. That's something that you go to a meeting or nowadays could have been handled in an email. Radiation poisoning. Oh, okay. Moving on. But
I think it's one of those things where, we think about it rationally, like, using nukes for civilian excavation projects sounds like a terrible idea. But you got to remember, the government was building all these bombs and we weren't using them, right? And they do have a shelf life. They've got to be maintained and whatnot. So there is actually a financial incentive to throw just a little bit more money at the problem to be like, well, what else can we do with these? Can we get some return on investment from this? Because again, a nuclear arsenal is wildly expensive to develop and maintain, let alone actually deploy and use in combat. So it's not as wild as it seems on the surface. And honestly, think about the researchers and scientists and engineers who are getting research grants and paychecks because of this stuff, right? It is seeding the economy and, and people's livelihoods to do this. So it's kind of like, this is insane, but if you're going to throw me a paycheck to explore this further, I'm going to explore it further. What else am I going to do?
I guess so. It's just a funny thought process. Like, you might as well just throw money out of a plane for these people.
Hey, we may have been better off doing that, but then we wouldn't have, space lasers and jokes about them.
Space lasers. Oh man. That is crazy. That was a huge thing. I remember in the 80s, the Star Wars project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was
George Lucas was thrilled about that.
Actually, I don't know what his response to that was. Again, Star Wars was a derisive nickname. It wasn't like a positive connotation. At least it wasn't given that way, right? So, but it was just the most relevant thing people could think of because Death Star. And it was kind of that same, everyone could immediately visualize what this meant. And so I was actually, in a counterintuitive way, like...
Good marketing.
When Ted Kennedy did that, he meant it derisively, but he gave the program the best possible marketing it could have ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he almost, it's kind of a version of the Streisand effect, right? In the way that he did it. If people were just like, what do you mean space lasers? I don't understand. Like this sounds crazy. I'm not in favor of this. But people go Star Wars like, oh, okay, lasers. I got you. Right. There's an immediate, it immediately clicks.
It's true. Yeah.
So
Madison Avenue right there.
Fuck the Kennedys. I think that's where we're going to leave off with. I think that's a good place to stop. Adam.
Sounds good.
I'll catch you later, bud.
Bye, man. Have
See
a
ya.
good one. Idiots Seeking Village is a production of Village Idiots Media. For more, find us online at villageidiotsmedia.com or find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and wherever you get podcasts.